lots of purposes like that. Going to the next slide. Yeah, so community engagement, absolutely essential to work with the community at all stages. We started this back in 21. Before we knew we had a parcel in mind, we just said, hey, what would you all value, community, in public forest? We got some inputs from that helped us figure out what parcel we needed defined. And we did a lot of site walks, cabling, community events, online, front porch forum, article in the Addison Independent to raise the profile of this and talk about it at town meeting and such as we got into 23. We sent out information in a postcard survey to all voters in town, 1,800 voters or so. And look at that lower left picture there of the postcards. So on the left is the stack of people that said, yes, you should do this. And we endorse you using, 200,000 of community funds, the town funds, to support this larger project. So the answer was pretty clear, and we moved forward. In the center, on the bottom there, UVM's landscape and inventory assessment class, graduate class, did a study last spring of the land, and they gave us a huge amount of useful information on the human history of the land, but also, the plants and wildlife that is currently present. And they did a very well attended walk and presentation on the land and at town hall. And then more recently, the picture on the top and on the right is of the community engagement we've been doing with the management planning. What about all the uses, hunting and trapping and mechanized, and what do you all think is important and how should we fit it all together? It's very complicated, right? So all of that took place in a series of meetings this past fall. We're still working through the last stages of putting that plan together, and then we'll share it back with the community and of course with partners. And we had, another round of surveys and meetings on all of that. So it's been a very robust engagement with the community, and we're getting, great support. Let's go to this next slide, look at the financial picture briefly. So 371,000 of VHCB funds supported this $1.15 million project, 450 acres. So that's $2 raised for every $1 VHCB. But I would say, the impact was even greater because the funding came really early. The town had sort of tentatively committed to this, roughly 200,000 number. VHCB said, yeah, we can do 371 as requested. And this is a great project. It has a lot of value. And that was important because we had also applied for a federal grant of similar size, 400,000. And it's a very competitive program as well. And, only a dozen or so awards every year nationally. But the state and local commitments, along with a good project plan, good team, great piece of land, good community support, all of that seemed to give us an edge that didn't cause us to get one of those federal grants. And at that point, we had the community feedback from that postcard survey with a big stack of yeses, and it was really starting to feel like it could happen to come together. Yeah, and as I mentioned, the town put 210 toward it. Community members donated 55,000 directly, so it's kind of an all-in effort to make this come together, which it did. Let's look at kind of what does this mean in the larger picture here. For the state and the town, a bit of improvement in our resilience to the climate future that we're looking at. It's, as I mentioned, supports watersheds in the lake. It brings the state a little bit closer to 30 by 30. Moncton's 15% conserved now, which is great. And I see personally, when I first started getting involved in the committee, I didn't quite understand housing and conservation being in the same board. That seemed weird to me, but now I think I get it because it's land use, right? It's two sides of the coin maybe, and that affordable house probably doesn't come with a lot of land. And so having public land that you can drive to in 5 minutes or walk to nearby, that supports quality of life. We have the space to do both, and we should do both. And I think VHCB is in a tremendous position to navigate that tricky balance of protecting forest walks and connectivity, Act 171, and more affordable housing. So, yes, as others have mentioned, please do support VHCB in making projects like the Moncton Town Forest possible. Particularly in these challenging funding times. And let's go to the last slide, please. So just, on behalf of the committee and the town, I want to say thank you for your work to enable PHCB's significant contribution to our project, but also, it's been less than 3 months and we're seeing the public out there using the land. These two pictures on the right are from Wednesday night when I went out for a walk there. Snowshoe tracks and, people are out there using it even in the frigid temperatures we've had recently. And so this is not just an asset for Moncton, it's for the whole community and the surrounding area. It's a good place to build community, which was the original idea of the town for us. And yeah, so thanks for having me. Of course, we have a lot more information on our website and you can always reach us that way too. Yeah, thanks.
Super, any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to thank you. This was great and congratulations. And
Yeah,
I'd love to come go for a hike with you there. So
Please do. That would be great.
thank you.
It's great work.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Julia, that's everybody.
Okay.
And I don't have to close it, just say.
No worries. Okay, well, thank you so much. And so great to hear about everybody's good work in all of this, and well, I'll look forward to having more conversation in the future about how fun. So to be continued. Thank you. Yeah. So we're not expecting TJ for another 15 minutes, so we're gonna take a break until 10.
You're all set.
Well, let's, we can give ourselves another minute or two. Well, unless you want.
Sounds done.
Oh.
All right, they're done. Just for.
Okay, that's all right. Well, then, TJ, let us know when you're ready and we'll get started.
Great.
Okay.
Trying to find the document to share.
It's on the website, you can go there and share your screen from there. That's.
Yeah, thank you. Ideally, it'll just
Yeah.
be the actual slides. There they are. It didn't pop up the first one. Okay, I'm ready. I'll pull this up when we're there. I'm
So you ready?
for it.
Okay, great. Okay, are you all ready here, team? Okay. We'll get started then. Hello, how are you?
Good, happy Valentine's.
Happy Valentine's. Okay, so we're coming back from our break. And yeah, gonna turn it over to you for part 3 of a little bit of background on regulatory world for electricity.
Thank you. For the record, TJ Ford, Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. And I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, it's big. And it didn't code for the slide. So last time we talked about the renewable energy standard and some of the costs, and we went into net metering and standard offer really quickly.
Just saying, which slide are you on?
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna start on slide 14, but so the slides are updated on your website. What I provided as handouts last time don't have a couple of the slides that I want to show here today.
Okay.
I wanted to come back and circle back to the renewable energy standard for a moment and then give an opportunity to talk about net metering and standard offer. If there were questions from last time, I can go back through some results slides and then talk about kind of what all this means in terms of grid planning into the future and some of our flexible resources like storage and our rate designs. So I wanted to start, I showed this slide last time and I don't want to belabor it. This is just our forward going estimate of costs of the renewable energy standard. And I just started here, and then the next slide, which you haven't seen before, is the historical reported cost from the utilities of the renewable energy standard. And you can see 2017, they started around $5 million and they go up to about $30 million, a little over in 2023. Well, yes. Well, where I want to go, I'm just showing you this to set up, is where I want to go, and I didn't go last time, is what do we get for that money? And so that's a piece that I didn't articulate last time. I want to make sure that I do articulate it, because it's not just cost, there are reasons that we do it. So did you have a question?
That was my question.
Okay.
You were right on.
Great. So first of all, I want to talk about the carbon savings, because we do get carbon savings when you compare from 2016, before we had a renewable energy standard. We're getting even in the first year of about in 2017, about 600,000 tons of carbon equivalent savings from the clean energy standard. Now that's compared to what our portfolio looked like in 2016, which was about half clean resources to start with. So that includes our nuclear contracts and ownership, Hydro-Quebec contracts, and some of our local hydro. And that's most of what's in there. And there's some ancillary stuff as well. But if you just think of half of our electricity supply could be considered clean in 2016, and now it is a significantly increased amount that can be considered clean because we have a renewable energy standard. These are measured in tons of carbon equivalent, in part to account for the tier 3, which is that fossil fuel reductions that utilities are required to capture.
their requirement is in megawatt hours, so there's some math that is done to turn, look at actual fossil fuel MMBTU reductions. And then translate to that to carbon savings, so
Is this tier 3 or is?
this is all three tiers.
All three tiers.
Or all three historic tiers.
Historic,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So you would expect this to increase somewhat as we get more and more clean. So how do we, oh, and just as a percentage, so 600,000, our total emissions are about, between 8 and 9 million metric tons, for the state as a whole, as reported by the greenhouse gas inventory. So 600,000, 5, 6, 7%, depending on the exact number. So just to give you an order of magnitude there, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. So how do we value that? So we usually, and that's not the only reduction, but I want to start there. It's a big one, or a value of what we get. How do we value greenhouse gas emissions? We do that through the social cost of carbon. So I am not an expert on exactly how that is designed, but I do know what it is and how we use it on. So it really is an estimate in dollars of the value of the future damage caused by increases in carbon dioxide. And those emissions into the atmosphere cause climate change, some damages associated with it when you value it. That includes health impacts. It includes like physical estimate of future damages from storms that we're going to see. And so we use that damages value as an equivalent of the benefits of actually reducing carbon emissions in the same amount for the year.
Can I ask you a little bit about that? I have never really understood where that value comes from, just in terms of like an equation. And I've always found it, I'm just gonna like editorialize a little bit here, which is to say that it has always struck me as odd to value it at a certain pretty finite metric, because the risk of climate change is just so astronomically has, but what are we talking about? Like the threatening of the entire species, like how do you put a value on that? Like it just feels really, it feels really limited to try to put a value on, the existence of your species. So, and I realize that's not for you to explain it really, but like, I've just always found that to be a weird and very limited number.
So I'll just respond to that by saying, I don't know, the specific equation of how it gets there, but I do know that it is, decades ago, the value we were placing on it was 0.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so now we have a value, about a decade ago, the department, in the energy efficiency context, kind of used a different metric that got to about $100 a ton of carbon, valued it there, and that was based on what would it cost to, if you stacked up all the measures that we need to hold climate change to a 2°C increase, like the IPCC recommended, what would be that marginal measure that you took? It usually was carbon capture, and that was valued at $100 a ton. That we had consultants did that valuation. We use that. This social cost of carbon has evolved in calculating it, and is kind of accepted, I guess I'd say, as a way to value future.
Fair enough, and I'm willing to roll with it. Do a couple comments, here and then there.
I'll ask, I'm not sure my ignorance about the process, but, Vermont landmass is 1/100 millionth of all the area of the world. So, I see what we're doing for Vermont and how great it is, but all the other pollution that's going on in the world, how do you figure that if everybody was doing what you're doing, as far as that calculation and was trying to do what Vermont's doing? I think that, we would be able to make a difference, but I'm grasping at straws trying to figure out why just Vermont is, why Vermont?
Right. Yeah, I think that is I think that's the question I wanna tee up, honestly, is similar to that, in that Vermont is doing a lot. I think we should recognize that we have had successes, right?
Sure.
And then other states, there's other entities that are doing a lot, but I think your point is that a lot of these benefits happen globally. And they don't necessarily directly accrue to Vermonters. Now, that's true of if Massachusetts makes an effort as well, right? Those benefits accrue globally, and Vermont gets a small tiny share of that as well. And so and then if somebody emits, we're getting the damage from that as well. And so it's a global perspective using this, and there is that balance of how much can and should Vermont do to affect that balance.
So how, is anybody looking at it from the world standpoint? I mean, maybe Norway or Sweden are doing some of the same, we don't know that, or do we?
Yeah, I
We
think
could get some
we
testimony
sure
about that,
can.
there's
We sure
a
can.
lot happening.
I mean, maybe we got more good things going on that are gonna throw these calculations off in the next decade. And if we could just isolate the polluters, you know, the ones that are contributing to the social cost of carbon. Maybe the world could put a little pressure on this.
Maybe we should have a little bit of a broader background. Testimony on the global picture of climate change, and the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah,
So I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm thinking
we don't have all those answers, that global perspective. It's like, but I think they're good questions.
Your communication was triggered something.
Yeah.
Good conversation, glad we're done. Go ahead.
I agree, I think that would be super helpful to have that big picture testimony. And the tragedy of the commons, I was thinking exactly the same thing, Madam Chair. And I had a question for TJ, but now I've got, my brain went somewhere else. But after we get that testimony, we should play the game that I told you guys.
Oh.
You can come play it with us.
It's a better.
Really, it's a board game, are you competitive with a board game?
Across the board, yes.
Okay. You should. But it's a cooperative game, it's called Daybreak, and it's about how you solve climate change
Oh.
together. And a lot of the cards you play are literally what you all play. Like what you're doing,
Yeah.
are in board game form. It's very cool, I was play it right in here, and I think it would help actually illustrate some of the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think what my point was going to be earlier was that there are lots of things that we try to put numbers on that feel kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the cost of a life in,
Yes.
you know, insurance world and things like that. That's sort of like what the social cost of carbon is doing, is like,
Fair.
you know, putting a number on the destruction of humanity, is hard to do, but somebody's gotta do
Somebody's
it.
gonna do it. Yeah, it's better than zero.
Yes.
Somebody else has got to pay for it.
Right.
We can't keep trying.
Well, I think humanity has to pay for its own existence.
In some way or another.
So,
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that tangent.
yeah, no, well, it's really important, and it's important to kind of explore how we value this, and then it's who's impacted, and you know, how are the benefits and the burdens of our policies distributed, right? And I think that's part of the point that I have been trying to articulate here, is here's where we are. And here's like kind of the current balance of that, and then we can all think about policy going forward. The last thing I'll say about the social cost of carbon is that the Climate Council adopted using this for in the climate action plan. I was the chair of the Science and Data Committee at the time when we first adopted it, and it was based on a lot of work that New York State has done, but ultimately tied to the Environmental Protection Agency's valuation of this, the social cost of carbon. Now, the EPA, as we know, can be change its direction based on political leadership. And when the Obama administration had one social cost of carbon value, for instance, the first Trump administration lowered it drastically. The Biden administration put it back up, and we'll see. I would expect in several months to see a change. And so tying it necessarily to the EPA may or may not be a good thing. But I think one good, there's it should just be evaluated on its merits, in my opinion, as opposed to having that political aspect of it, which it does have. And so I just wanted to call that out for when you see things, it may change. And part of that is how leadership values the future versus the present. That's a big piece of the social cost of carbon. It's called the discount rate, right? And how you discount future costs and benefits versus the future. And certain administrations have a higher discount rate, lower one, and that's all up for debate for what the right value is, I guess. So okay, so with that, using the social cost of carbon that has been most recently updated by the EPA, I'll use as a rough number about $200 a ton of carbon. It's a stream of values that goes over time, so it's a little lower in some years, a little higher in future years, but we're talking about it today. I'll use $200. Those emissions reductions from the renewable energy standard that I showed 2 slides ago equate to, from 2017 to about 2020, about $120 million per year of benefits from reducing carbon. So and if you recall a few slides ago, the renewable energy standard started at $5 million in year 1 going forward, up to 30 million. So that gives you a sense of scale, right? There's some investment, and then that are being made by Vermont ratepayers. Those costs are to Vermont ratepayers, and these benefits are accruing societally. And first time I was in, I talked about that trade-off of ratepayer versus societal impact, and so there are significant societal impacts of what we're doing. So I think that's the point for this slide. Okay, I have 2 more slides here on this, and these are related to, these are slides that were developed about 1.5 years ago by Sustainable Energy Advantage, which is a consultant that we had for the renewable energy standard update process. They were vetted, all the assumptions in these slides were vetted through a stakeholder advisory group that had 6 meetings, discussed these, and they were, I won't say they were consensus. I actually didn't necessarily agree with every one of the values that were in here, but they were a working set of assumptions that everybody moved forward with. And so what I'm going to show are,
We do have a question.
Can you just kind of give me an idea of who the stakeholders were in this advisory group?
sure, we had about 12 to 15 stakeholders, and we, similar to the climate council process, we asked people to self-nominate. We didn't want the scope to be 40 people in a technical working group. So it ranged from Renewable Energy Vermont to electric utilities to certain some developers, like on the ground developers, that to regional planning commissions, to a couple of just citizens, and there was a couple of legislators as well. So on our website, there is a description of the process and who was there, but it was an attempt to get a broad range of perspectives involved and engaged. And those entities, those people, about 4 people, I think, 4 out of the 14 or so, were not participating as part of their job. And so we were able to fund their participation so that they would be able to actually come and be engaged and focused on it. So what I'm gonna show is, in the modeling, we did a number of scenarios. None of these scenarios are actually what was ultimately passed in legislation, and that is not the point of these slides. What the point I wanna share is kind of what is included when we look at a societal benefit and what's included when we look at a Vermont benefit. And so again, not saying what's right or wrong here, I just wanna show you what was done. And you can see this picture is the societal incremental cost from going from the current renewable energy standard to any range of these scenarios. And these scenarios had different levels of new renewable generation, whether nuclear was included or not. Biomass was another question. And you can see in every single scenario on a societal basis, the benefits were greater than the costs on a from a societal perspective. That top teal line is the greenhouse gas benefits. Those are the type using the social cost of carbon. At the time, the updated value had not been adopted by the Climate Council, so it's actually a smaller value than we would use now. So that green teal bar would be even bigger, but again, the society in all scenarios, even with that lower amount, greater than the cost. That second bar, that gray bar, is something called price suppression. And so when especially when a new resource comes online and a resource that has zero fuel costs, it either reduces our load in the case of small scale solar, for instance, or it gets bid into the wholesale regional marketplace that I talked about the last times, and it gets bid in at zero cost. So what that does is ultimately lowers that market clearing price. Because in those wholesale markets, you have, say you had a gigawatt of demand that needed to be met, and suppliers come in and say, hey, I will supply that for free in the terms a solar developer, or for $100 or $200, and you stack up the lowest price bids until you get to a clearing price, and then everybody is paid that clearing price. And so when a zero cost resource comes in, it knocks out the highest price resource, and all prices across New England are lowered. So that's a good thing. These price suppression benefits are suppression benefits to all of New England. So Vermont has only a small share of that. We're about 5% of New England. And then even then, we are fairly well hedged with long-term contracts. So only even a portion of that 5% accrues to Vermont. And so those are the two biggest societal benefits there. We also have other environmental health benefits. We talk about reduced losses. There's transmission and distribution benefits. Those are avoided distribution and transmission costs. We count even when a solar plant interconnects, right? A lot of times that they have to do some upgrades to the existing infrastructure. We counted a portion of that cost as a benefit to the grid, because utilities eventually would have had to upgrade some of that anyway. And so those are some of the other costs or benefits that we see here. And I'm going to switch slides here for a second. And so these are the societal benefits, and now here's the same cost basically, but here's the benefits to Vermont. And so you can see when you take out those societal ones, that in every scenario, the costs are greater than the benefits to Vermonters. Now we can talk about like that benefit of the how to apportion that societal benefit to Vermont, but this is the question: is how much should Vermont pay for societal benefits, of which Vermont is part of society? So, and I just wanted to kind of elucidate that difference with some of the modeling that had been done last year.
I know you're about to jump into standard offer, and I just want to do a time check because I was just looking at your slides, and that like, are you hoping to get through all of them today?
So after this slide, I have so I already went through the standard offer and the Peter slides, and so after this slide, I was going to skip to 7 more.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say like
Yeah.
You look familiar, but just where we were, okay, thank you, I just wanted to make sure that I was. Right, or like, gonna be on track, so, it sounds like we are, that's great.
You know, an interesting other way to think about this would be to also show the benefits that we accrue from the work of others doing the same thing that we're doing. And then compare that to our, and show that as well, because it's to the extent that it's related. It's, I get this slide, but it also does not take account of the fact that our neighbors doing the same thing actually, to the same extent that we're giving benefits to others with what we do, that we are also gaining them. So it'd be interesting to try to look at it that way as well. They're all relevant. All right.
It is, thinking about how our path affected other states' path, I think about like the selling, how about how we were accepting Hydro-Quebec recs. And no other New England state was, but now that we are out of that and that arbitrage can no longer happen, I'm just gonna say it out loud, right? That, how does that put upward pressure on other states to also do exactly those benefits? That you're talking about, and that because of our choices, the other states have had to make better choices as well.
Right, I think it does go both ways.
Yeah.
Right, we were the last one in New England by almost a decade to have a renewable energy standard. And that, but on the other hand, other states now do accept a certain portion of Hydro-Quebec regs, and so it's that back and forth.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would put that on a graph.
Yeah, right. I feel like you'd have to look at it. Yeah, it would be complicated. I think here, yeah.
Just so for context, to show my ignorance, you actually work for the Department of Public Service.
Correct.
So you're working for the administration.
Correct.
Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing to me how much work has actually gone into this, and you're doing an excellent job presenting it. And I'm thinking that, Vermont is really setting the trend here. Other states, are they working with us to figure out what you're doing?
Yeah, there's a group called the New England States Committee on Electricity that we're a part of, that we meet really regularly. We're really focused on transmission costs right now, for instance, and lowering those, but we do work, through the Governors Association. There's a state energy office, national group. We try and work very closely, sharing what we do and then learning from other states as well.
Just back to your chart yesterday, I mean, what we're losing because of the inefficiency of the grid. Maybe we're gonna make up for that with what Vermont's doing, but it could be done so much better. Thank you.
Senator.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Senator Baumgart who made that observation that if we look at the benefits from other actors that we're getting, and it's beyond just New England. I mean, you mentioned Norway. What Norway does to help reduce its emissions actually benefits us. And there are many, many, many actors in the world that are doing a lot more than Vermont is.
Yes.
And as TJ noted, Vermont was a decade behind our partner states in having a renewable energy standard at all. And we have the highest greenhouse gas emissions per pupil. It's not per pupil, per person, per capita, that's the word, of any New England state. So, we are behind in a lot of ways. So I think there often is this kind of narrative that, oh, we're ahead of so many other places, but we're not. We're doing what we need to be doing in order to be a good citizen of the world, in my opinion.
I will say on electricity, where we are now in terms of both whether you count it prior to renewable energy credits or after renewable energy credits, which is probably the right way to count it. We are really clean. Our electricity is our electricity is like 2% of our total state emissions in how the inventory counts it. And statewide, we have more solar per capita, more distributed energy resources. Not per capita, per our peak load. More storage for peak load than at least any other Northeast state. And the solar for peak capacity for our peak is up there with it's behind Hawaii, I think, which has noticeably more sun than we do. And California. And then we're right there, right? And so there are successes that we should acknowledge. And then yeah, I've been working on this stuff through administrations for the last 20 years, right? So I do work for the current administration. I've worked for several administrations now, and I think the through line is we are doing a lot. Can we do more? Probably. And it's a matter of how we prioritize what we do
And
next.
how much is more cost too?
Yeah, right.
Texas is pretty far up there too, aren't they? I mean, you got tons of wind going on down there and solar.
They do. When I say distributed energy resources, I'm actually talking about smaller ones, but in terms of even I think we're ahead of Texas. They have a lot more people, a lot bigger peak.
Sure,
right?
of course, yeah.
New York just several months ago talked about a big initiative to get 10 gigawatts of solar by 2030, which is awesome. Their peak is 35 gigawatts. So that 10 gigawatts is, a third of their peak. We're already at like 50%, 60%. So now and continuing. So I want to move on here. What I'll say about the standard offer program again and the net metering program, I went through all of these slides last time, is that they all fall under the umbrella of the renewable energy standard, right? The renewable energy standard sets how much new renewable energy we're going to get, how much total renewable energy, and then how much new renewable energy. So the standard offer program and the net metering program are specific like carve outs underneath that saying this is how much of that overall target we want to get from this specific program to this specific choice. And those are policy choices that we made and can talk about going forward. So this slide really just, I think I showed this one really briefly, but it does show how much distributed resources we have, over 550 megawatts of solar, another 150 megawatts of wind, hydro, biomass. Our total peak in demand less than a gigawatt, and even lower than that. Our total renewable capacity is almost a gigawatt more than our total peak in demand, and that counts some of the bigger resources like those wind projects, etc. How does it compare? How does what we've gotten compare to the renewable energy standard? So the bars on this chart are different policies and types of renewable energy that we've gotten to meet our tier 2 requirements. Those lower dash lines or the previous tier 2, that in-state generation tier, and you can see that over time we've far exceeded the amount of distributed energy generation that was necessary to keep up with that tier. You can see the top 2 dash lines are what Act 179 of last year put in place, where we'll need estimated 42 to 50 megawatts, depending on how load grows, of new renewables going forward. Now you can see some years in the past we've exceeded that. We have some of those resources in the bank, but it will require in a couple of years us to procure more new renewable generation going forward. Okay, so I'll just stop there. I breezed through last time standard offer and net metering. There wasn't really time for questions. I don't know. I didn't refresh you on them very much here, but if there's questions on that, we could go into it. And then I'm going to transition to actually managing the grid here.
I think for now we should, unless there are questions, we should just keep going.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, so how do we manage the grid and planning for the future grid? This is just a slide pulled off a Department of Energy webinar, I think. But it's useful to kind of showing that when you have increased distributed energy resources, that it really means additional complexity in how the grid is planned and operated. And you can see the star in there at the bottom of stage 3. Vermont, I think, is actually well into stage 3 of having a really high level of renewable energy, distributed energy resources, and now some electric vehicles and heat pumps to integrate and utilize. And it really speaks to the need to think about how grid services are provided, and how rates are designed, and how ownership structures for those resources, and how markets, planning, and operations are coordinated. So we're like pretty far along the curve here in terms of the need for grid orchestration. One of those things, one of those issues that comes up when we have high penetration are generation constraints. So the ability to move generation in certain areas out to where the load is. On the left-hand side, you can see a chart from the Belco 2024 long-range transmission plan showing different areas of the state that have different levels of hosting capacity. That top part of the state, you can see in red, that's mostly Vermont Electric Cooperative Service territory, but from a transmission level, they in 2024 had 0 to 25 megawatts more capacity before upgrades would be necessary to accommodate more generation. You can see in the bottom half of the state, 200 to 300 megawatts are available. So the question becomes, how do we encourage resources to locate in the areas of the state that can host it without actually that additional generation, or without having to build additional transmission headroom? The chart on the right, or the middle, I guess, of the slide is just a snapshot of Green Mountain Power's hosting capacity map, and it's like a stoplight, right? Red is no more capacity, green is you can locate here on our system. Again, the Champlain Valley there for a long time, I think, had some good electrical resources and perhaps cheaper land, and so at least as far as GMP's territory goes, so it attracted that to be the spot for development. Now, when you go out of that, either if you locate there, you may have more interconnection upgrades that needs more costs, or you need to move to another area of the state that may not have been your first choice. For whatever reason, land costs might be higher, the grid upgrades might be more, even if there's headroom, that comes with additional costs. And we just need to make sure we're thinking of that, encouraging those resources to go in when there's lower costs. Yeah.
The map on the right, what is the red, and the green and the yellow? There's no.
It's hosting capacity. So this is Green Mountain Power's distribution system, and the red are places on the distribution system that cannot be interconnected without additional upgrades necessary.
Oh,
Transmission load is like tapped out.
Right.
got it.
This one's distribution load, but
Oh, distribution,
yeah,
not transmission,
yeah.
Okay.
distribution.
There's no
So
key on.
you're talking additional solar project?
Right, right, so,
Cause
Any real-
farms in there.
no, no,
Right.
in the red.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
It'd be additional solar, but it'd be any additional generation,
Okay.
right? And there could be other mechanisms to help, right? You could come to an agreement to curtail the generation at the time that in a kind of dump the solar power that you would otherwise be able to generate and not put it onto the grid, right? But then that comes at a cost. You could add storage capability, that also comes at a cost. So, and has other benefits associated with it too, but so the utilities are encouraged to plan these costs. And as we think about programs, we just need them to be located in the most efficient places.
So one way to think of it could be that the red is a prime location for additional battery.
Potentially.
Or among other
Yes.
potential.
So that would be another benefit to the battery, but it comes, if we're thinking about our policy of more renewable generation, having that battery, if it doesn't already pay for itself, that battery is a cost associated with the generation. So, but yes,
Go ahead, Senator Hardy and then Senator Williams.
Okay, so reading the text and looking at the map, what it sounds like is where the red is. There's not enough ability to distribute the energy. But in the north part where it's just gray, there's generation problem, it's hard to.
Oh, sorry. So,
I'm
yeah, I can better,
text and the,
I will better label this map in the future. Thank you for the questions. So
okay,
the-
it's just the text is dense and the map is
Yes.
labeled, so it's hard for me to understand what's going on here, but and also how do microgrids play into this? Cause I know there are a couple microgrids in my district, for example, and are they part of this, or do they help or hurt this?
So to answer your first question, the map on the right here is just Green Mountain. There's only colors on Green Mountain Power's territory
I see,
lines.
okay.
So the
That's-
non-colored spot is not Green Mountain Power's territory.
I see, okay.
Service territory. And yes, where it's red, there is not the distribution capacity to get all the power out without a significant upgrade.
Okay,
So, and then on the left is Velco's map, that's the transmission level, scale, and it's saying in the northern part of the state, from a transmission basis, there's not enough headroom in order to get the power out to where the demand is.
okay,
Your question on microgrids, microgrids really allow for, a community or a circuit to be isolated and kind of, you could shut off and
yeah,
not take, power or not push power out. I don't believe it really affects this because it would be a really tiny portion, you could say, I could do a microgrid here, but, and not export the power if I had extra power.
mhm,
And so it wouldn't help the rest of the territory at all. It could, and then you get into a situation where if you have power to export, you're still having to curtail that because you don't have enough load in your isolated community.
mhm,
And so microgrids have a number of other different benefits and pros and cons, but it doesn't necessarily help these maps.
okay.
Anything further?
No,
Okay, Senator Williams.
I want you to help clear my mind of something. Somebody once told me that the grid in Vermont was designed from the southeast to the northwest. And that was because of Vernon and the transmission lines to the New Hampshire, Massachusetts, is that still applicable or is it not, never, has it never been?
I don't know the answer to that question, in terms of how, I think now it's really thought of more holistically. But power does generally flow from where it is to where the demand centers are, and the demand centers are really not in Vermont. Well, in Vermont, there again, Findon County, but really.
Generationally in the southeast,
Right.
You know.
But we have the McNeil plant has served in the northwest also. There's a 10 megawatt facility in Swanton, another 20 megawatts up at Sheldon in the northwest also. So there is a lot of, and those are all older units as well. So that wasn't a great
No.
answer to your
Well,
question,
if it isn't true, I just get it out of my mind. Because it does, I mean, it kind of shows on that map where You can accept more maybe because of the way the grid.
Right, I think the infrastructure is stronger in the south in part because of Vernon and the that was structured to support a 600 megawatt nuclear plant, which is no longer there, so more generation can come to mind down there, because that infrastructure is there.
All right, I'll kind of put it in the back.
Okay, I'm sorry for all the text in these slides. I take a lot of these from our annual energy report and, if there was time, I would take a lot of this text out, I think, but, so really the point of this slide is that so now we have, as the grid is evolving, we have more variability in generation resources that are on the distributed energy generation resources we talked about, and when they produce and how much they produce. And the variability of load with more electrification coming on, electric vehicles are a big end use, and heat pumps are a big end use. And so this evolution is really kind of underscoring the need for more flexibility. And so the small chart on the bottom left here shows one of those scenarios that we talked about. This one's a little closer, but not exact to what ultimately got passed. And you can see the expectation is that in April, May, and June, when there's the biggest producing solar months, we have more generation than we need. The demand is lower to start with. No heat pumps are going to be on. We haven't hit the summer cooling season yet. And then in September, October, November, in this particular scenario, I was trying to move something so I could see it. Sorry, can't see anything on the screen right now. Okay. Right. In that particular scenario, that creates some variability in September, October, November. Utilities still need to buy more power. In April, May, and June, they need to sell it. So that, we talk about being hedged as a state. Oh, it's okay. Hedged as a state, 85 to 90%. Part of that is utilities will have to look forward and say, hey, we're going to have to hedge our extra generation and sell that, or we're going to sell that into the marketplace. And usually, over the last few years, as New England has more and more solar, those are at times when the market prices are low, so you don't get a lot of money for when you sell that generation in, because everybody gets a lot of solar. When you need to purchase in November and December here, in this particular scenario, or if you needed to purchase in January, which is not in this particular scenario, you would need to, you would be purchasing at higher prices. And so there's that, so we need to be flexible in how we're bringing generation online and how we're managing load to minimize the need to kind of buy and sell at those times. The center slide is the center chart there is how long the surplus generally lasts, and those durations are important as we look at the solutions. You can't ask somebody to not heat their home with their heat pump for, maybe it'll do it for an hour or cycle it, but for 12 hours, probably not. Storage is generally a 4-hour resource right now. And so we're just illustrating kind of the future here. And then in 5 and 10 years, we may want to think about, right now, our renewable energy standard is on an annual basis. So you could actually comply with the renewable energy standard with just generation that was in July, and you could comply with it for the whole year and purchase dirty power in January or all the other months. You would be considered 100% renewable. Well, we're not ready for that yet, but we may want to do that in 5 or 10 years, look at compliance on a quarterly basis or more granularly, so that we better match that supply and demand. So something on our mind in the future.
Go ahead.
this graph on my left, TJ,
Yes.
I'm trying to understand, I mean, it would seem to me that it would seem to me that September would be a much smaller deficit than December. Because, solar really starts to struggle in those months and the use of heat pumps increases dramatically. But is this showing like how much AC that people are using still, even in September?
I think that that's a good question. I think it is, it must partially be AC. Solar is definitely still operating in September, but
Yeah.
it's getting dark sooner.
Right, equinoxes and.
Right.
Yeah,
And so I think I would need to follow up to get a specific.
okay,
answer to
it
you.
just seems like we were just talking heat pumps and solar, it would be a different curve than it was right there.
Electric vehicles is the other big load that is projected in here as well, but yes, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now in terms of managing the grid, the load generation is not the only variable that is changing. Climate is also changing as well. And as we electrify more and more people are using electricity for their mobility, for their space heating needs, we need to make sure that it is reliable. And then when it does go out, that the duration of outages is much shorter, we respond quicker. And so utilities are making investments, undergrounding lines, relocating lines that are through the woods onto the roads. See spacer cables, those star-shaped things that are on the lines. Those are spacer cables. A tree can actually fall on those, and the power that will stay on. And give utility workers time to actually go remove the tree. And so utilities are continuing to improve those winter forecasting efforts, their response practices. There's a lot of coordination going on in terms of some of the Climate Council's resilience committees, state energy security plan, et cetera. One big thing that is happening is that very soon, maybe I think as early as today, we will be petitioning the Public Utility Commission to open a proceeding to better understand how to measure how we're doing on resilience and track it and encourage investments and understand kind of a benefit cost analysis. What is the value of these investments? Which investments should we be making and when to move us forward? So we're understanding that we need to do better, and this proceeding is hopefully a very collaborative with the Department of Utilities Commission to establish the regulatory structures to ensure that we're improving that resilience. So
How do you anticipate that petition sort of interacting with the with ANR's resiliency implementation plan?
I think this is one aspect of it. We do coordinate with ANR in terms of the measuring assessment progress tool, and we think that this is really focused on the electric infrastructure portion of that big broader effort.
It seems to me too that, as we're talking about resilience, there's a Venn diagram of infrastructure, right? Like some things are beneficial just for resilience, some things are beneficial just for greenhouse gas reduction, and then there's some things that are in the middle, and I feel like that could be useful to put some focus there.
Right.
Attention.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think I am on time. I only have a couple more slides. There's a lot more slides in here for reference, but a couple more slides to go through. And they relate to where are we now with our flexible resources. I've been saying we need more flexible resources. So, well, what do we have on the system? Right now, we have about 74 megawatts of operational distributed batteries with another 38 megawatts permitted or in the process. So over 100 megawatts kind of ready to go. And again, our peak last year was about 850 megawatts. And so we've got a lot of storage on the system. There's also some bigger storage units that are participating in the ISO New England markets that are or want to participate in the markets that are planned to be located in Vermont. Which are relevant. We don't know if they're going to really come online or not at this point, but they are proposed and in the queue to sign up. Then there's
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just want, is there a slide coming up, or maybe you can just respond to it, about the geographical distribution of those storage facilities? I mean, are they a tool to, you know, the problem we have with transmission in certain areas of the state, getting it out? Is there a strategy to, as far as, is there a strategy regarding where they're geographically being located? I guess is what I'm asking.
So a lot of this, a lot of the current storage are in Green Mountain Power service territory. I do not have a map of where they are. But in terms of them being located in areas in the planning framework for responding to those generation constraints. Belco, as part of the long-range transmission plan, start with transmission, identifies where there are likely to be constraints, both load constraints and generation constraints. And then through the Vermont System Planning Committee, there are processes in place required by the Public Utility Commission for utilities to then propose alternatives to those transmission solutions. So they say, hey, there's a generation constraint. Belco says this. Utilities are then required to come up with a reliability plan. Here's how we're going to meet that constraint. And it's whether it's generation or load. On the load side, they say, well, we already are managing a lot of that load through electric vehicle rates. And so those, in some cases, we're done. In other cases, the duration of that constraint is like 12 hours or 24 hours. And so that's not alone a solution. It needs to be kind of stacked with other solutions, which could be storage, could be other load flexibility, could be partial transmission solution with some of those other solutions, and it could be generation. And so there's that process, then the utilities need to go before the Public Utility Commission present their plans and avoid those transmission constraints if they can.
Go ahead.
So thinking about supply and demand, as we bring more renewable energy online, is that having an effect on ISO New England's rates? Because we're not consuming as much, and that way, and is there some kind of a metric that you guys calculate that?
Yes, so essentially our utilities are charged based on their load, right? In ISO New England has a certain amount of costs, like transmission costs already embedded, or there's wholesale market costs, and you apply that to how much load you have. Some of our small solar reduces that load, and so there's that that is kind of counted in the ratepayer benefit here. Also, that's what I was talking about with price suppression. It reduces those prices for everybody, in which we get a portion of that we count there. It also reduces charges that are based on like certain hours of the month, like regional transmission is charged to utilities every month based on your load at the time of the region, Vermont's load at the time of the region, and then your share of Vermont's load. And so, every month. And so those, 5-6 years ago, solar, for instance, was avoiding a lot of that. Now those peak load times are occurring more and more, and mostly at 8-9 o'clock on late, 5-6 o'clock in late. And so the value of new resources is different than the value of the older resources. And when you compare, you see the charts that I showed earlier, and if you compare those to like a chart from New Hampshire, for instance, who has very little solar penetration, especially relative to Vermont, their values for avoided transmission and distribution are much higher, and says, well, there's a lot more value of locating this for a utility. New Hampshire because we are already kind of further on the curve there. But, okay, I think I have one or two more slides. Time of use rates, electric vehicle rates, and certain programs are being offered to actually really manage the load as well. In terms of energy storage, just putting it in the New England context, you can see there for the Vermont line, 74 megawatts deployed. That is 8.7% of our current peak. And if you include the stuff that's about to come online in construction or permitting, 13.1% of our current peak. That blows away where Connecticut, Maine, and Massachusetts are in terms of percent of storage located relative to their own peak. It even, we're well on our way already to what their targets are, even in 2030. And so we keep locating storage here. I mentioned Green Mountain Power before, but other utilities are, VIPSA has proposed a utility scale storage. Vermont Electric Co-op has a significant amount of storage. And so other utilities as well are kind of, even in Vermont, there is a difference between utilities, and other utilities are proposing and kind of catching up with Green Mountain Power.
Question, yes.
Yeah, can you remind, what's our target, PJ?
We do not have a target. So,
Okay.
We could.
we could, and the question is, do we need one? And
Yeah,
what,
Yeah.
what would it be? I mean, I don't
and
know.
right, and
Yeah.
if we're chugging along here, well, I will refrain from, we can talk about that when we get into the policy discussions, because
It would be interesting to see what the uptake is of storage. What the curve is like.
Yeah.
Another question here, go ahead.
That's 74 megawatts of storage. Help me understand what that actually does for us. Does it take an hour off peak? Or what does it translate to on a daily or weekly basis or something?
Most of the batteries, not all of them, but most of them have a 4-hour duration. So 74 megawatt, if you think of 74 megawatts available for 4 hours. And the use case for the batteries now is often exactly that, avoiding peak. So you can, if the peak is really sharp for your distribution system and you would otherwise need a new substation, right, you can avoid that substation potentially. Although if your peak is a 6-hour duration, that makes it harder. You need more batteries to cover that whole 6 hours. It also, I talked about those transmission costs that are 1 hour of every month that are being deployed in probably 3/4 of the time. Utilities are able to hit those peaks and avoid costs and charges for New England that New England was charging. In that case, all that means is that other states have to pick up those costs, but they are a ratepayer benefit, not a societal benefit. It's just transferring those costs elsewhere. Those are the main use cases. There's also something called frequency regulation in the market that is ISO New England trying to match supply and demand exactly, which needs to be done with electricity. And that ensures the proper flow of electricity on the lines to avoid reliability issues for transmission lines. And there's a market for that, and the batteries are participating in that market as well.
One more, and then we should,
I think that may be my last one.
okay.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand the math here. So our peak is 855 megawatt hours, megawatts
Yes.
in an hour. Or no,
In 1 hour.
In 1 hour.
Yeah,
And we have storage capacity for 74.
correct.
So we can't run the whole grid for 4 hours on these batteries, right?
No.
Okay,
Right.
so yeah, so what is, when you say that they're 4 hours in duration, does that mean we could
that we can partially operate the grid for 4 hours or?
Well, we wouldn't have enough storage yet to do that
Yeah,
anyway.
okay.
And part of that would depend on where they're located, I think, as well, but really, what this says is we could take 74 megawatts off of that 855. And that hour would be 74 megawatts lower.
Okay.
Now, the next highest hour might have been 850, right? And so we could take 74 megawatts off that. Yeah, you
Okay,
can shave
okay.
off that part of it.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that, how that.
The other thing is a lot of the batteries in place are, power walls in people's homes and. If the peak is expected. And if the peak was expected to be on this coming Sunday, for example, right, when we're gonna get a lot of snow. The utilities will not call those units and use them to shave the peak. They will, allow them to be available for customers for their own resilience, to stay online in the case of an outage. And so there, I think there's an open question of, well, how much of those can we rely on to avoid an actual transmission constraint, for instance? If we are also relying on them to be resilient in the case of a storm or an outage.
So if everybody had an F-150 in their garage, then, they had 4 hours to run their household. That would take away from the requirement for power to that one building. So it's not the case. And then, I know Green Mountain Power had an effort to get a Tesla battery in every home. But it was pretty cost prohibitive.
Right, so, I hear you saying that the legislature is gonna give everybody a.
Right.
150.
No,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But no, you're seriously though, that goes into the variability of load and generation that in how to manage the grid, and that is another resource that could be available to us. And we need to think about how we incorporate that in the grand orchestration of the grid.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we okay to? wrap
Yeah, the
up?
last slide here was just a list of that everybody is heading towards electric vehicle rates.
Fair enough.
We have a few programs that we can talk about another time. So.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and we probably should another time, but thank you. More to come.
Great, thank you.
For sure. And now, we have, Mr. from, Renewable Energy Vermont. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Back.
for sure. Back, yes.
Right, so thank you, I'm Peter Sterling, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Vermont, very grateful for some time to talk about some of the benefits of Vermont's investments in the renewable energy standard and in renewable energy generally. So my first slide. Sorry, just want to say we've heard a bunch about the costs of renewables, but there's two sides, right? When I go to Shaw's, I can look at the cost side of my receipt, but you want to look at the benefit side too, all the stuff you're getting. And as you can see, my family likes cheese a lot. Okay, so here we go. Vermont's renewable energy impact, I'll start on the economics. In 2024, we put up about 30 megawatts of in-state solar, generating, according to the national formulas, about 75 million to 100 million in direct economic activity, over 30% of which comes from federal incentives, the IRA, REAP grant, things like that. So when we do DG in Vermont, we're pulling in a significant amount of federal money to help us meet our energy needs. The updated RES requirements will about double this install rate when the install really gets cooking. So we'll be even seeing more economic activity because we've updated the RES. And again, a lot of that money is coming in from the IRA and REAP grants and things like that. So when REV modified the department's model to reflect the updated RES, we found that from 2025 to 2035, there are about $126 million in benefits to Vermont ratepayers, such as reduced line losses and reduced transmission costs. I can come up with a whole list. But again, we modified the RES model for the department to do the specifics of RES reform, and we found $126 million in benefits. 94% of these benefits came from the in-state requirements. So while the other stuff we buy from out of state is helpful, the real economic drivers that is in the benefits to ratepayers comes from in-state distributed generation And according to the department's Clean Energy Industry Report, which comes out annually, the renewable energy sector employed 5,622 people in 2024. There's some other savings from investing in renewables that you can read on your own that we've not really seen numbers on. The historic benefits from peak shaving, how much municipalities and schools save from net metering, things like that. Okay, so what do we get from investing in the res? Okay, absent the requirement,
Show us which slide.
oh,
Hold it, I'm sorry, show us which slide you're on.
oh, like a slideshow. I don't have a number.
That's okay,
It's like-
just do that. Just do that.
You got the banner, right? What do Vermonters get from investing in the res? Absent the requirement to retire RECs under the renewable energy standard, 59% of Vermont's electricity would come from the dirtiest elements of the New England grid. So on the left, you can see, because we're allowed to retire RECs through a renewable energy standard, we have what we can legally say is quite a clean grid. Were we to not have RECs under retirement under the res, our legally our energy purchases would look a lot different. In addition, next slide, what it does for greenhouse gas emissions. So the slide at the very bottom there was the slide from the department's annual res report or energy report. And that was the expense associated with the res. And you can see with all my arrows, because we do have a res, that expense does allow us to say that by 2035, we will have no greenhouse gas emissions from the electric sector. The bars on the left show you the emissions from the transportation and thermal sector according to the Energy Action Network. So the bar chart on the right would say without the res, that's what we would legally have to say our emissions. So we are getting the ability to say we have no emissions from our electric sector in 2035 by investing in the res. I mean, that's super important. Next slide. We've heard a bunch about, we hear often about the transmission costs associated with renewable energy and distributed generation. Well, of course, there will be some costs. Really, another way to look at this is the transmission costs are also increasing because Vermonters are electrifying. Mr. Ford talked about some of the distribution upgrades, transmission upgrades that are necessary to happen with the maps with the red and those, that's true. Belco said in their long range transmission plan that they're planning on doing $500 million in upgrades by 2033. And they've been planning on doing this before the res bill is expanded. There may be some other ways they can bring that number down with some other time of use things and other, but their plan right, in there is to spend about $500 million by 2033 to upgrade the transmission distribution system because to meet the new load from electrification. So you can see the transmission costs coming. You can say it's coming from distributed generation, but at least Velcro is in part saying it's coming because Vermonters are using electricity because we're asking them to. So, and again, I just put these two slides up because the Green Mountain Power, who I think did an incredible job in their integrated resource plan. It's a really positive document, really forward looking. They're saying they can support 950 megawatts of interconnected solar without requiring transmission or substation upgrades. I think that's similar to what TJ just said before me, that if we are putting this in the right spot and let these upgrades happen, we're not going to be jacking ratepayers with these massive costs to interconnect solar. That's probably not. We have to put it in the right spots. That makes sense. I think we all agree on that. Next slide. Looking at affordability in renewables. We've heard again a lot about cost of renewables. It is a little bone to pick that I have when the department did their polling on Vermonters prioritizing affordability and all that. They never defined affordability. I think most of us would agree that electricity needs to be affordable, otherwise people aren't going to buy EVs and all that. So, that when we're hearing that Vermonters prize affordability, yeah, I mean, without defining it, it gets a little tricky about how much of a priority it really is. But there's another question from their poll, the bar chart on the right. A question from the department's poll asked Vermonters what additional amount they would pay each month for 100% renewable or low carbon energy. Only 31% said nothing. You can see the rest of the percentage. So when given a specific, many people did say they're willing to pay more. So that kind of gives you some perspective on the whole affordability piece. Affordability means different numbers to different people, is what I'm saying. I also just want to add, we've heard something about the cost of net metering and unaffordability and cost shifts and stuff like that. In the public service department's publicly engagement process with generating these two piece of information. None of the 180 people who responded said they wanted net metering compensation reduced. In addition, when the department held a public comment period this past December for its report on Act 179, it received 175 public comments. Not a single individual commented that compensation for net metering should be reduced. And I'm only mentioning that because we hear about affordability and cost shifting. While I'm sure everyone wants, we have the lowest rates in New England and people want prices to come down. I've just not heard that people want the price to come down at the expense of Vermonters being able to go solar at home or in their.
When you say compensation for net metering, do you mean, I mean, I think I know, could you just explain what that
Yeah,
phrase means?
sure. So right now, when you net meter, you get what's called the blended rate minus some adjusters set by the Public Utility Commission. So for your picture, you're probably, depending on what utility, you're getting something near 14 cents a kilowatt hour when you net meter, and you get a bill credit for that. When every 2 years, the Public Utility Commission makes a decision whether to move that adjuster up or down. It's in statute that the Department of Public Service has to adjust that blended rate, which is in statute again. So the Public Utility Commission basically moves how much the compensation Vermonters receive every 2 years by moving those adjusters. So I don't want to say money because PUC doesn't actually say like money, they move these adjusters. So I was just trying to be clear, but at the end of the day, it's how many bill credits you get. You don't get actual money. So you get more bill credits or less bill credits, depending on what the Public Utility Commission decides. Clear as mud?
I'm with you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You're talking about, smart meters? No,
No, I'm talking about compensation for people who are enrolled in the new people who enroll in the net metering program. So whether you have a smart meter or not is kind of not essential.
So by reducing the compensation, it would be like, for somebody who has solar, they're gonna earn the point is nobody was commenting that people should earn less credits.
Right, so let me just be
Or-
clear, so there are two things that were happening. First, in 2024, when the res bill was being debated, the Department of Public Service, their proposal, which for res reform included retroactively decreasing how much Vermonters, the 22,000 people who net meter got. In addition, there was also part of the proposal was for new customers who net meter, that compensation should also change. I think what we're talking about here, most importantly, is what's happening forward-looking, right? So when a new person enrolls, you're basically just moving out the payback period. So if someone wants to invest in solar in their home, are you talking about a 12-year payback period, a 15-year, an 18-year? And that's what most consumers make their decision on. There are a few ancient people like, oh, it's 20 years, doesn't matter, I gotta go do this. There's a couple of those, but really it's like, oh, it's 12 years, maybe that's doable. If it's 10, you get a lot more people hopping on more than 10 years payback period. If it was 15, you lose a bunch. And so that's kind of what we're talking about when I'm talking about reducing compensation for people who want to net meter. When you reduce it, you're taking more people out of that pie than realistically. It's not actually a barrier. You're not saying no one can do it. The law says if you want to net meter, you can net meter. But by moving that payback period out and ruling people out. And the last piece I feel like I just want to go into just for a second. Really, wow, it's great. I'm moving right along. We've heard a bunch about this net metering cost shift, and we don't have to really go into this a lot. But I just wanted to throw it out there that this cost shift we hear about from net metering, comes from two pieces according. One is lost sales to utilities. And the other one is the extra price your utilities are paying to customers for getting that power, right? Because when you're getting paid that 14 cents kilowatt hour, a utility most of the time can buy it on the open market for less. That is part of the problem some people think we have. But the lost utility sales piece in this cost shift argument is really troubling to me because what that's saying is the same, and this is what Ed McNamara said in the part that circle is, if someone buys a really efficient refrigerator, that's now a lost sale, right? That's the thing that got us into the problem we have right now, right? Like a lost sale to a utility shouldn't really be counted against net metering. I mean, part of the reason I believe the Public Utility Commission takes down the price of net metering, you those adjusters is, it's a way to help compensate utilities for, the fixed costs that they have, when a net meter customer isn't, using their net meter power. So when we hear about the cost shift, at least, at the very least, that part about the lost sales is really not, I don't think it's a really perfect way to look at that expense of net metering. And then I just also wanted to say in the bottom, the part about the exported part of power, the New Hampshire Department of Energy did a value distributed energy study, look at all the benefits of net metering. You can see that chart there, that is not applicable to Vermont. We have a much different kind of solar penetration. I want to be really clear. This chart, I'm not saying in this chart that this is how much Vermont, if we did the same study, would value net metering at, we would not. But when you look at that column on the right, there are benefits that when our Department of Public Service and our Public Utility Commission evaluate the benefits of net metering, they do not count, distribution capacity, answer service, a whole bunch of things, and it all adds up. And the other part I will say, you could also think about is, while it would count for all solar, but definitely for net metering, that 5 cents at the top, that gray one, the environmental cost, that's the social cost of carbon. So when New Hampshire looked at the value of net metering to customers, they added a nickel for every kilowatt hour to say, this is stuff that's not getting burned, there's all these benefits to society, let's throw a nickel on there, and that really lessens the cost shift. So I'm just saying there's a lot of ways to look at the benefits of net metering, as well as, what that cost is, and, that's just something to consider as we move forward. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Or let you go to break before you understand.
Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I want to thank you for explaining the rate credit. Most of Vermont, more Vermonters out there, until they get it solar, they think it's an energy credit, which I think is really kind of interesting. I wish it was an energy credit.
Yeah.
So thank you for clarifying that. I also think though, and this is just like from a marketing standpoint, the whole notion of the 10, 15 or 20-year payback, I think just kind of falls flat on Vermonters. I think and I think you could show them, is they want to know that if they're focused on the affordability piece of it, like, is this going to reduce my energy costs, including acquisition, next year? And I think a lot of times you can show that it does, but I think that's something Vermonters really respond to. Like, this could help my budget next year instead of you suck it up for 20 years. You might get something at the end.
How would it help if you Well,
you just add up the finance costs of the system and your new energy costs from the utility compared to what it would be if you didn't do anything before.
Unless.
I don't.
Thinking about like this uncommon model, right, where, the installation costs sort of rolled into it and start saving money immediately, which I know.
Yeah.
I don't know where that's at, but that has the potential.
Yeah, I just think that would be for Vermonters.
It is such I mean, I think about this as the problem for so many of the technologies that we're trying to deploy, right? It is all just about cash flow and the initial investment being the barrier for people. Like, how do we help people get over that barrier to get to that cheaper future? And
But cash flow is important.
yeah,
A lot of Vermonters can't afford to pay more. If they put the system, they just can't afford to pay that.
Right, you would never pay more if you went either. Yeah.
On an annual basis. I mean, I don't think it's gonna be better unless I think that's a lot of people think that when they put in a solar panel, that they're protecting themselves against the future increases of electricity. You're not.
I mean, it might be less, but it's just.
You're not protecting yourself from the increase.
Right, yeah.
Right, because you have, you factored in, most people, when they sign that in your contract, they factored in inflation at 3%.
Mhm.
So, you're protecting yourself a little bit. What you're really doing is, let's say you took out a 15-year loan to pay back this thing. At the end of 15 years, you are paying nothing.
Yeah, that's true.
And you are getting all this solar power. That's what I mean about
And the capital costs are done.
Be happy because it's set it and forget it. Yeah, if your inverter breaks, something happens with that.
Yeah.
Is it can happen, but really what you're getting is at the end of that payback period, you're getting free electricity, and that's mostly what you can sell for most customers on who aren't like, I just want to fight climate change.
That's exactly how, frankly, I did it, the loan,
Yeah.
for the credit union.
Right.
And it is costing me more for those 10 years, but at the end.
Right. And so you were able to kind of absorb that cost over the 10 years, and you weren't thrilled about it, but you did it, knowing that 10 years it's all gonna work out better. And I'm saying when you push that out for 15 years, you lose a chunk of people.
I understand.
Oh, yes.
Have you,
Yeah.
have we done an analysis about how many dollars we're keeping in state with this, you know, both, all the factors that go into, you know, the salaries.
Right, I mean, I guess one. Well, no, that's a real good question. I think we can look into that. So
One of the arguments that I make to myself anyway,
Yeah.
is that as we go to 20% in state renewable, we're keeping a lot of dollars in state,
Right.
otherwise we're going out of state.
Right.
Have we quantified that thing?
Well, I did this first bullet, there's a national formula that everyone uses about every watt you put up generates a certain number of dollars of economic activity, so we use that national formula, whether it's perfect or not, I can't tell you, but everyone uses it. It says, by doing the distributed generation, it's 75 million to 100 million for that 30 megawatts. However, in theory, if we did not build that 30 megawatts as distributed generation, you could have maybe built one large 30 megawatts somewhere in Orleans, I don't know, pick a town, right? So that money, in theory, some of that would have stayed, but when we built this, honestly, most of this stuff, the economic activity is like the small solar people climbing on your roof, and that's where most of the economic activity, those big, large jobs don't. You just kind of like do it once and forget it. And so I could find a number, but I would say that this first bullet point of the 30 megawatts of solar distributed in-state solar generating 75 to 100 million dollars. That's a pretty decent number, and especially with our res requirement, if we're gonna be doubling that this install rate, we're talking, a bunch of money. I can get you the exact number for all the solar, but I just think that one shows you what in-state solar distributed generation, not the group itself would do. Like, what's a big hydro? I don't know, I have no idea.
Well, we're starting to get a call to go to the floor, so
Okay.
thank you so much.
Great, well, thank you for having me, I appreciate it, I hope you all have a great